working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. China is seen as the most influential economic and political power in Southeast Asia, but its expanding influence is not viewed favorably by a majority of respondents in a survey of Southeast Asians.
I would say that in a dismal
The Philippines contingent to earthquake-battered Turkey extricated 2 bodies and a mutilated leg during operations in the country's southeastern city of Adiyaman. Singapore said it'll stick to its economic growth forecast for 2023, despite the slowdown last year, encouraged by China's rapid reopening after years of crushing zero-COVID policies. Meanwhile, the White House tonight saying that there's no evidence that the 3 mysterious objects shot down recently by U.S. fighter jets came from anywhere other than Earth. First in our news, the ASEAN Study Center at the ASEA's Yusof Ishak Institute officially launched its flagship annual publication, the State of Southeast Asia 2023 Survey Report. And findings revealed that Southeast Asia's top preoccupations are with recessionary pressures, potential military tensions, and a slow and ineffective ASEAN. Professor Ko was surprised about the negative perception of ASEAN being ineffective and slow, elaborating that consensus making is a process that requires time. Take a look.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shinkok. I would like to focus on the economic concerns. I would say that in general, these concerns are shared by people in other parts of the world. However, one of the concerns, the fear of recession, is misplaced. I will explain. The ASEAN countries, individually and collectively, have actually done well. They succeeded in balancing the need to protect lives with the need to protect jobs. And when it was, as soon as it was possible, they removed the COVID-19 restrictions and opened up the economy. As a result, I would say that in a dismal world, ASEAN is a bright spot. The ADB has estimated that in 2023, the group as a whole will grow by about 4.6%, which compared to other parts of the world is a very good number. I was actually very surprised by the perceptions of ASEAN as ineffective and slow and so on, you know. ASEAN, unlike the European Union, it's an intergovernmental organization. It's a community of 10 sovereign countries, which are very diverse, have different interests. And our policy is always to consult and to arrive at a consensus. And this takes time. So sometimes it may appear to be slow, but the slowness is required by the process of consultation and consensus making. I would defend ASEAN and say, on the whole, ASEAN has not been slow. We responded very rapidly to the COVID-19 crisis. We adopted an ASEAN Comprehensive Economic Recovery Framework, which have helped to facilitate the recovery of the economies of the region. On Myanmar, as soon as the military seized power on the 1st of February, we convened a leaders' meeting in Jakarta, which adopted the 5-point consensus. So I would defend ASEAN and say that the perception that we are slow, we are ineffective, we are unable to respond quickly to new development is an unfair perception.
And just to add, I'm not sure I understand the concern about ASEAN's capabilities. These are tough times, but ASEAN has a very good track record of changing and adapting two tough times. In fact, it was formed in difficult circumstances and adapted to each subsequent geopolitical shift and change. Post-Vietnam War, China-US rapprochement, now China-US rivalry, unipolar moment, end of the Cold War. Each time ASEAN adjusted. The global slowdown, economic slowdown. So I assume that in these tough times, ASEAN will change and evolve again. And I think that's what we're seeing happening around us.
Unlike the EU, Professor Ko said ASEAN doesn't have a parliament, court, single currency, or a common foreign and security policy. ASEAN is confronted with a very troublesome member, Myanmar. And he said the reality is that the military junta in Myanmar has the support of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. He also said his conclusion is based on the following development. On December 22 last year, the Thai foreign minister invited the military junta's foreign minister to a meeting in Bangkok. However, only Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam attended the meeting. The ASEAN foreign ministers met in Jakarta under the chairmanship of Indonesia on the 3rd and 4th of February this year. At the end of the meeting, the Indonesian foreign minister, Ibu Retno Marsudi, announced that the ASEAN ministers had agreed on a united approach to deal with the Myanmar crisis through the 5-point consensus. Now, findings from the latest run of the State of Southeast Asia survey conducted by the ASEAN Study Center at the ASEAN's Yusof Ishak Institute, revealing that Southeast Asia's top preoccupations are with recessionary pressures, potential military tensions, and a said slow and ineffective ASEAN. But China continues to be regarded as the most influential economic and political power in the region, and the U.S. has sharpened its edge over China in the event of a forced choice, while Japan remains its most trusted major power. Again, SNN.
One of the questions that we ask every year is which country or regional organization is the most influential economic power in Southeast Asia. And here it's no surprise, China is still regarded as the most influential economic power at 59.9%. It is the yellow bar here. Although its influence declined significantly from 76.7% last year, following the strict COVID-related mobility restrictions that we saw. And then the second one, the second most voted is ASEAN. So we see here that ASEAN's economic influence actually increased from 7.6% to 15%. And this perception is most pronounced in Laos, where they showed us a more than tenfold increase in the perception of ASEAN. The United States gained ground from 9.8% to 10.5%, but it fell to third placing this year. And its influence gained significant recognition from Malaysia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. Just to add on, the United States was actually second place last year. And here, the next question follow-up to this one was what is their view of this economic power's influence on their country? And here we see the region continues to express worry about China's regional economic influence at 64.5%. Here, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam respondents have greater concerns about China's economic rise. But the majority of respondents welcome ASEAN and the US's economic influence at 60.9% and 65.7% respectively. But we do note that there is an increasing number of countries that have expressed some worry about ASEAN's economic influence compared to 2022. In the next question, we ask them which country or regional organization has the most influential political and strategic power in Southeast Asia. Again, China, the yellow bar here, is the most influential in terms of the political and strategic power at 41.5%, and it is followed by the US at 31.9% and ASEAN at 13.5%. Sorry, that's a mistake, 13.5%. The perception of Chinese influence declined significantly from 54.4% last year to 41.5%. And the decrease mainly came from Laos at minus 44.2% and from Myanmar at minus 30.9%. An increasing number of Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, and Singapore, are choosing the US over China. In the follow-up here, are they worried or do they welcome this political power's influence on their country? Again, the expression is that they are generally worried about China's growing regional, political, and strategic influence at 68.5%, and this is down from 76.4% last year. Brunei at 94.4% and Cambodia 47.4% has shown the greatest acceptance of China's political strategic influence.
Now, the report also said that still, if ASEAN were forced to choose between the two major powers, China or the US, 2/3 of respondents, or 61%, will cast their lot with the United States. Professor Tommy Ko, a Singaporean diplomat, lawyer, professor, and author who served as Singapore's permanent representative to the UN between 1968 and 71, outlined the reasons. Take a look.
Our Chinese friends in Beijing must be wondering, how is it possible that we are regarded by the people of the region as the most powerful, most influential country economically and politically, and yet we are not trusted by the region? And I want to try to answer that question. Dong Xiao, you're not trusted by the region for 3 reasons. In 2014, when the Philippines invoked its rights under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to refer its disputes, you weaponize trade and tourism to punish the Philippines. So the other ASEAN countries are worried that with your enormous power, you will weaponize your economic power to punish any country that goes against your wishes. The second reason why you're not trusted is your conduct in the South China Sea. To many ASEAN countries, there's no legal basis supporting your extensive claims in the South China Sea. And one of the rulings of the Arbitral Tribunal in 2016 was to the effect that the 9-line map put forward by China to support its claim has no legal basis. The third reason why you're not trusted is your behavior on the Langchang-Mekong River. I don't know whether my Chinese friends know that there's a difference between national rivers and international rivers. In a national river, you have absolute sovereignty. You can do whatever you want. You can build as many dams as you want. But Mekong is an international river. You cannot build dams in the upper reaches of the Langchang without taking into consideration the interests of the lower riparian states. And people living in the lower riparian state, especially in Vietnam and Cambodia, are suffering from the 11 dams that you built in the upper reaches of the river.
Now, the majority of respondents from Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia favored China over the U.S. The other states favored the U.S., with the Philippines and Vietnam having the highest percentage of support for the U.S. over China. In tonight's other news, the Philippines contingent to earthquake-battered Turkey extricated 2 bodies and a mutilated leg during operations in the country's southeastern city of Adiyaman. Meanwhile, the Philippine contingent in Turkey revealed the challenges they face in their rescue efforts. Let's take a look.
Both for outpatient services and emergency care. Nag-provide po tayo ng 24/7 emergency consultations as well as assessment. And then yung po mga kailangan mga hospital ay pinapalipat po namin dito sa nearby facility. Ang major challenge po natin, number 1, is extreme weather nga po. No? Right now, we are at -4 degrees centigrade. No? And this has this is really a big challenge for the team. First time po na maka-expose dito sa extreme weather condition. Hindi lang po ang movement namin ng apektado, pati po ang aming mga kagamitan. May mga mabilis po ma-drain ng ating mga battery packs, ang ating mga gadgets. Pangalawa po, yung language barrier. No? Kasi hindi po lahat ng tao dito ay marunong mag-English. Ang maganda po, meron tayong mga interpreters na mga volunteers na tumutulong sa amin para maintindihan yung pag-approach sa ating mga pasyente. Of course, we are also very mindful of the cultural sensitivity, considering that there are other ethnic groups and as well as religious groups in this area. So, ang ginagawa po namin, pag po ang pasyente ay babae, babae din po ang tumitingin na doctor at nurse. Pag lalaki, lalaki po ang doctor at nurse na tumitingin sa pasyente.
So, basically, sir, nakita natin dito, sir, is Adiyaman is mga collapse sa building dito sa mga high-rise buildings. So, we are expecting that based on sa mga information na receive namin, sir, is marami talagang casualty na trap.
Now, rescue teams are now beginning to wind down the search for survivors as the focus switched to tackling a dire humanitarian disaster caused by the earthquake that has left more than 35,000 dead in Turkey and Syria. Survivors face a lack of water and poor sanitation. In Turkey's southern Adiyaman, an outbreak of scabies, a skin disease known to spread in crowded areas, is now affecting adults while children are suffering from diarrhea. Turkey's Vice President Fuat Oktay said 574 children pulled from collapsed buildings were found without any surviving parents. Only 76 had been returned to other family members. And the city is now being patrolled by police and soldiers deployed to prevent looting following several incidents over the weekend. The economic cost of the disaster could be as much as $84.1 billion. In other news, one of Indonesia's most senior police officers was sentenced to death over the murder of his bodyguard. Take a look.
6 atau tanggal 7 Agustus mendapatkan terdakwa Ferdi Sambo SH SIKMH telah terbukti secara sah dan meyakinkan bersalah melakukan tindak pidana turut serta melakukan
hadir semua Tuhan pengacara di dalam persidangan. Luar biasa, puji Tuhan telah nyata. Tuhan kesehatan darah anakku yang beriman. Maafkan doa kami dan semua doa publik telah Tuhan nyatakan keajaibannya pada hari ini di persidangan. Terima kasih Tuhan Yesus, terima kasih.
Now, Ferdi Sambo, a two-star general and former head of the Internal Affairs for the National Police, was named as a suspect after his bodyguard was found dead at Sambo's home in July in a killing police were initially alleged to have covered up. Sambo was accused of ordering a subordinate to shoot 27-year-old Brigadier Nofriancia Yosua Huta Barat and then firing a bullet into the wounded victim himself. He was arrested in August and discharged from the force in September before a months-long trial that grabbed national headlines and shone a light on a pervading sense of police impunity in the archipelago nation. Sambo has a week to appeal the verdict. When Huta Barat's death came to light, police initially said another member of the security detail had killed him, having caught him sexually assaulting Sambo's wife. But Sambo and his wife were arrested weeks later. Police didn't reveal the killing for days and said surveillance cameras were not working when Huta Barat was killed. The judge said CCTV footage was deleted by a Sambo subordinate. Sambo's wife, Putri Kadrawati, was also sentenced on Monday to 20 years in prison, much higher than the 8-year term prosecutors were seeking. Now in the country, the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, or LEDAC, expressed commitment to push for the ratification of the Philippines' participation in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, Mega Free Trade Deal. In a press release, Malacanang said Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, who joined President Marcos Jr. in his 5-day official trip to Tokyo, and Senator Loren Legarda expressed commitment to jointly defend the ratification of RCEP on the Senate floor. The Senate is currently deliberating on the RCEP, with hearings currently at the subcommittee level. Zubiri earlier said the Senate aims to ratify the RCEP trade agreement with the first quarter of the year. President Marcos earlier said that RCEP would be good for the country because of the increased trade that it will bring to different member economies. The RCEP is a free trade agreement between the 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and its 5 FTA partners, namely Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. It was signed by the Philippines in November of 2020. The RCEP entered into force for another signatory countries on January 1 last year, but remains unimplemented without the ratification of the Senate. Singapore said it will stick to its economic growth forecast for 2023 despite the slowdown last year, encouraged by China's rapid reopening after years of crushing zero-COVID policies. Take a look. Now, the city-state's economic performance is often seen as a useful barometer of the global environment because of its reliance on trade with the rest of the world. Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry said in a statement that it would maintain its growth forecast of 0.5 to 2.5%. It also pointed to the easing of global commodity prices, but cautioned that they remain elevated with the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Singapore's economy expanded by 3.6% in 2022, slowing from the 8.9% growth in 2021, according to the ministry. Its government lifted the bulk of its COVID restrictions last year on Monday. It also ended the requirement to wear face masks on public transport. Now, despite the reopening of China, the world's second biggest economy, and other positive global trends, the MTI warned that uncertainties remain and pointed to the rate hike campaigns by central banks to rein in inflation, as well as the impact of property sector woes and the weakening global demand on China's recovery. Meanwhile, Indonesia's economic growth accelerated to a 9-year high in 2022 despite global uncertainty and a final quarter slowdown according to official data, owing to soaring commodity prices and easing COVID curbs. Indonesia was badly affected by the coronavirus pandemic, with its exports and tourism-reliant economy taking a massive hit in 2020 as GDP shrunk by 2.07%, its first recession since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. But Southeast Asia's largest economy has bounced back since then, posting economic growth last year of 5.31%, according to Statistics Indonesia, the highest level since 2013. Statistics Agency head Marco Yuwono said that growth was propelled by high export prices and the lifting of travel restrictions, with dropped quarantine requirements in March, spurring business and spiking tourist arrivals. Indonesia removed most movement curves last year after daily cases dropped and vaccination rates rose, driving up household consumption. All remaining measures were lifted at the end of the year. The United States has recovered important sensor and electronics parts from a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon it shot down earlier this month, according to the U.S. military. But China insists the balloon, which spent several days flying over North America, was an errant weather observation aircraft with no military purpose. But the U.S. says it was a sophisticated high-altitude spying vehicle. Take a look.
Even though we had no indications that any of these three objects were surveilling, we couldn't rule that out. And so there, you want to err on the side of safety here in terms of protecting our national security interests, and the fact that these objects could have and likely did at some point in their path transit over potential military sites of ours or sensitive sites. We know the first one was Chinese. They admitted it. They claimed it was a weather balloon. We know it's not. These three, we don't have attribution for right now. We don't know who owns them.
Now, a U.S. F-22 Raptor fighter jet shot it down over the coast of South Carolina on February 4, and teams have since been working to recover the debris for analysis. American warplanes have downed 3 other objects since then, one near Alaska, another over Canada, and a third over Lake Huron. But authorities have not identified their origin or purpose. Now, as said, a number of other such devices have since been shot down over the U.S. and Canada, though Beijing has only admitted that the first was one of its own. And China is now accusing the U.S. of sending over 10 balloons into its airspace since January of 2022. Let's listen in.
美方气球非法进入别国领空也司空见惯。仅去年以来，美方高空气球未经中国相关部门批准，10余次非法飞越中国领空。美方首先要做的，应当是反躬自省、改弦更张，而不是污蔑抹黑、煽动对抗。
Now, any claim that the U.S. government operates surveillance balloons over the PRC is false, according to National Security Council spokesperson Adrienne Watson on Twitter. It is China, she said, that has a high-altitude surveillance balloon program for intelligence collection that it has used to violate the sovereignty of the U.S. and over 40 countries across 5 continents. The State Department responded with a similar rejection and called Beijing's accusation the latest example of China scrambling to do damage control. On Friday and Saturday, U.S. jets shot down 2 more objects near Alaska and over northern Canada. Those objects were flying at around 40,000 feet and have balloon-like features with a small metal cylinder underneath. Sunday's object over Lake Huron was flying at around 20,000 feet, and it was described by officials as octagonal with potential surveillance capabilities. The incidents have sparked confusion and prompted bipartisan criticism for lawmakers. Meanwhile, the White House now also saying that there's no evidence that the 3 mysterious objects shot down recently by U.S. fighter jets came from anywhere other than Earth. Take a look.
And one last thing before I turn it over to the Admiral, I just wanted to make sure we address this from the White House. I know there have been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. I'm not.
Would you tell us?
I'm just, I loved E.T., the movie, but I'm just going to leave it there.
Love E.T. too. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.